Hello, eighth graders. Today we are going to talk, just kind of review a little bit before we go on to our study of the outer four planets. We're going to pause for a second and just do a little comparing and contrasting between the inner planets, the terrestrial planets, and the outer gas giants. All right, so these inner planets are, as you can see, quite small compared to these four outer planets, and they're rocky. These are the four planets that you could actually stand on. Now, the conditions of these two in particular would prevent us from ever standing on them, but obviously Earth is just right, and we have clearly made efforts to possibly stand on Mars one day. And the reason they are so small and they are so rocky is that in the formation of our solar system, when the sun ignited, it stripped away these light, very light gases that are around these these inner rocky planets. And so all that remains is a relatively thin atmosphere as compared to these four outer planets. These far ones are so far that the gases that make them up are frozen, okay? But then with more density, with more mass and density, those that creates heat, and some of those frozen gases melted into a gaseous atmosphere. So these four outer planets, what you're seeing here is not a surface that you could stand on. This is more, the vast majority of all four of these planets is atmosphere, it's gases. And there is a small rocky core somewhere down in the middle, and that is just from their massive size and their density squishes together all that gas and actually condenses it into a solid form. It's actually a metallic solid core. All right, these terrestrial planets have like I said, a very thin, as compared to these outer planets, a very thin atmosphere, mainly made up of CO2 and nitrogen and oxygen and the things that we need or have deemed necessary for life, whereas these outer planets are, the bulk of the gases that make them up are lighter, like hydrogen and helium. We have explored these outer planets by space probe. We obviously can't go and land on anything out there, and it would take far too long for us to get out there. You know, if you think of the year trip it would take for a human to get to Mars, it's going to take a lot longer to get out here. And also, as you can see by this green line here, we would have to cross the asteroid belt, which would be a bit like a video game, right? It'd be kind of like Star Wars, flying through all of these very large bullets that do not bode well for a trip to the outer solar system. We have sent probes, like I've said, to go and orbit around orbiters, to go and map out or take pictures of the surface, the outer edges of these atmospheres. And some of our probes we have just sent out on a long trip to the outer solar system, and they've just taken pictures on their way by. One of our probes that was orbiting around Jupiter, we crash landed that into Jupiter in 2003, and that was a pretty spectacular show for the people at NASA. They watched the Galileo space probe go crashing in and burn up in the atmosphere. And then we've also landed, actually, a spacecraft on one of the moons of Saturn, the moon Titan. But other than that, we have just basically been, exploring them just by probes and orbiters. The outer planets are also known. Sometimes you'll hear, instead of them being called gas giants, you'll hear them called Jovian. The word Jovian actually literally means Jupiter-like. So these would be known as our terrestrial planets, and these would be known as our Jovian planets. But for our purposes, you can use either word, gas giant or Jovian. And then outside of Neptune, we have two different areas. The Kuiper Belt, which is full of ice and comets, and that's where Pluto resides and some other dwarf planets. And then even further out beyond that, there's another area called the Oort cloud, which is where most of our comets originate. And we'll talk about both of these very, very distant areas also once we get past studying Neptune. Okay, so that is about it for our comparing and contrasting of the planets. And we are going to play a Kahoot today to do a little bit of a review. And we will talk about Jupiter next.